समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
What comes to your mind when I mention Argentina? For some, it's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent meeting with President Javier Milei en route to the recently concluded BRICS summit in Brazil. For others, it's Milei himself, flamboyant, a bit eccentric, and unapologetically libertarian, often hailed by President Donald Trump as a great new hope for Latin America. Military history buffs might also recall the bloody Falklands War in 1982, a brief but brutal conflict between the UK and Argentina. At the time, Argentina was under a military dictatorship, desperate to shore up its dwindling authority. That gamble failed spectacularly. The military regime collapsed a year after the crushing defeat, and much water has flown ever since. During the Cold War, the country maintained a peculiar balancing act. It aligned with the US on many fronts, while also identified with the non-aligned movement and Third World causes. It was a dance between ideology, survival, and aspiration. So fast forward to today, and Javier Milei is trying to deal as efficiently as he can with the cards he has inherited. Let's look at his cards. The policies of the libertarian president have done much to stabilize Argentina's long turbulent economy. Its notoriously high inflation has cooled, its currency controls have been toned down, and it has notched its first budget surplus in 14 years, which is quite a feat. And unlike several of its neighbors, particularly Brazil under the left-leaning Lula, which maintains a non-Western tilt while balancing ties with China and Russia and is a member of the BRICS, Argentina under Javier Milei has taken a sharply pro-Western stance. Milei's outspoken criticism of China has been welcomed by many in the West, particularly in Washington and London, who view his leadership as a strategic reset in the region. As countries like Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil deepen economic ties with Beijing, Milei has moved decisively in the opposite direction. I'll give you a few examples. He formally requested NATO partnership status in 2023. Following in the footsteps of Colombia. The same year, he withdrew Argentina's application to join BRICS. He also cancelled a planned purchase of the Chinese-Pakistani co-produced JF-17 fighter jets, signaling his intention to steer Argentina's defense procurement towards Western suppliers. So, can we say that these moves collectively indicate a broader geopolitical pivot back towards the Western alliance system, or is there more than what meets the eye? But first, let's dive a bit deeper on defense. Argentina is set to acquire 24 used American F-16 fighter jets from Denmark, with the first batch of 6 expected to arrive by the end of this year. In addition, a deal has been finalized to purchase P-3 Orion maritime surveillance aircraft from Norway, aimed at enhancing Argentina's coastal monitoring capabilities. But the modernization doesn't stop here. Argentine Defense Minister Luis Petri has recently signed an agreement in the US for the acquisition of Stryker armored infantry vehicles. If completed, this would significantly upgrade Argentina's aging armored fleet, which currently relies on outdated M113 units and locally built TAM combat vehicles. Just months earlier, in April, US Admiral Alvin Halsey, head of the US Southern Command, visited Argentina for high-level talks. He met with President Javier Milei, the Defense Minister Petri, and Military Chief General Javier Isaac to discuss military cooperation and US support for Argentina's defense modernization efforts. So the question that should be arising in your mind now is, How has Milei, whose country once fought a valiant war against British imperialism in Falkland, become so pro-West? To truly understand Argentina's current geopolitical posture, one must revisit the enduring legacy of the Falklands War, known in Argentina as Las Malvinas. The 1982 conflict lasted just about 74 days, but claimed over 900 lives, leaving deep scar on the Argentinian side. The Falkland Islands, British overseas territories in South Atlantic, lie about 8,000 miles from the UK. Argentina has contested British sovereignty over them since 1833, but this war was about far more than disputed territory. It was the desperate gamble of a collapsing Argentine military junta, using nationalism to rally public support, a tactic mirrored in other authoritarian regimes. Think of Mao's China during the Cultural Revolution. Anyway, for Argentina, this miscalculation proved costly. Margaret Thatcher's Britain responded swiftly and forcefully, launching its first full-scale naval deployment after the Second World War, a feat only the United States could match today. Not even Britain can repeat it. The British, back in the day, assembled a massive task force, 127 warships, submarines, and merchant vessels packed with troops and aircraft. Though Argentine soldiers fought bravely, including a successful Exocet missile strike on HMS Sheffield, they were undertrained and largely under-equipped, as well as most of them were conscripts. 7 British ships were lost and others heavily damaged, but the British won. Tragically, in the years that followed, around 300 Argentine veterans died by suicide, haunted by trauma and the sense of betrayal by their own governments. Yet, despite the defeat, the war is now remembered with solemn pride in Argentina. The fallen have been honored, the battle commemorated, a potent reminder of how national identity and history remain deeply entwined. But what about the status of the islands? The Falkland Islands remain a British overseas territory, protected by stationed Typhoon fighter jets and the HMS Fourth Patrol vessel. Over the years, multiple referendums have also happened, and they have affirmed that the people of the Falkland desire to remain under British sovereignty. For instance, in 1986, 96% voted in favor of staying with Britain, and in 2013, that figure rose to 99%. Despite this, many Argentinians still see the islands as unfinished business, with some even calling for Margaret Thatcher to be posthumously tried for war crimes, highlighting the lingering emotional and nationalistic tension. But why am I discussing the Falkland War in such detail today? This is because President Javier Milei has taken a markedly different approach. Unlike previous leaders, Milei supports the UK's position that Falkland Islanders have the right to self-determination. In a striking departure from Argentina's traditional and official stance, he has declared that equating sovereignty with the size of a state is an Orwellian political illusion. Now, while this position has drawn sharp criticism from political opponents, it signals a dramatic shift in Argentina's long-standing policy on the Falklands, which is now opening new arenas of geopolitical cooperation and competition. Let's take a look how. Argentina's geographic position has long held strategic value for the West, particularly the United States. Situated very close to Antarctica, where, please remember, both Russia and China operate 15 bases between them. Argentina's southern reach offers proximity to vital contested resources. Now, looking at the map, you can see that South Atlantic's link to the Pacific via the Strait of Magellan makes the region geopolitically crucial, as it provides an alternative maritime route to the Panama Canal. With President Javier Milei adopting a strongly pro-Western stance, especially his unexpected support for the UK's position on the Falklands, the US has also moved swiftly to deepen strategic engagement. This includes support for Argentina's military modernization efforts, with Milei aiming to overhaul the armed forces using NATO standard equipment. And I'll explain this a little better. Though his government is making deep spending cuts almost everywhere else, he plans to aggressively raise the defense budget from a 0.5% to a 2% of GDP over the next 7 years. In line with this pivot, defense dialogue has also resumed between Argentina and Britain, marking a thaw after years of diplomatic frost, and you can understand why. Now, while the US pushed the UK to approve the sale of F-16s with British-made components to Argentina, London hesitated. And ultimately, a workaround was found, which was that Argentina secured older F-16s from Denmark, financed with $40 million in American funding. Britain has historically blocked the export of any military hardware with British parts to Argentina, and this reflects a lingering mistrust post-Falklands War. Nonetheless, a quiet but growing military alignment is emerging between Argentina, the United States, UK, as well as the broader West. Now, although Milei prioritizes ties with Washington, a pragmatic working relationship with Britain appears to be developing, which is creating a win-win for all stakeholders. But at this juncture, let's ask, what about China? Now, while he is hyper-West on strategic affairs and defense, Javier Milei is also turning pragmatic on China. So what began as an openly critical stance towards China, especially when Milei had just come in, after a few months, it kind of evolved into an increasingly pragmatic collaboration, and this reflects the complexities of the international scenario and the economic needs of Argentina, which prevail over ideological convictions. So I'll give you a few examples. Argentina wants to trade with China. It is also a signatory to BRI and a bilateral trade which had peaked in 2022 but declined in 2023 and then 2024 but has now stabilized. Now, Milei has announced several times that he has to make a trip to China, but so far it remains unmaterialized. That said, it may happen soon. Now, to conclude, Latin America remains a contested chessboard. The scramble for influence, be it in Africa, Central Asia, or the South Atlantic, is very much present as it was in the 18th century. Only now, the difference is that the indigenous powers have more options. So whether Milei's gamble will pay off, politically or diplomatically, remains to be seen. But for now, Milei is playing a bold hand in a game long defined by bluffs. And Argentina's geopolitical arc remains just as fascinating. I'm going to revisit the South Atlantic theatre from an Indian perspective soon, so you better stay tuned.